Welcome everybody to another installment in our distance learning series. We, just like you, are digesting, evaluating, and adapting to the constant flow of information and changes to our daily routine that we find ourselves in today. To ensure that we are meeting all of your needs as small business owners statewide, we are putting out a lot of information on a lot of different platforms. So please make sure that you check in with us wherever you can. Our website has a COVID-19 resource page and several subsequent resource pages stemming off of that. We have another page on our website with a full list of upcoming classes, webinars like this one, and any other events hosted by the Iowa Center and the Women's Business Center. Our Instagram handle at the Iowa Center is posting information about our upcoming events and local small business profiles. Our team also created a Facebook group called Iowa Small Business Resources and Support. And that's just been a really great place for members of the small business community across the state of Iowa to ask questions, brainstorm, maybe vent a little bit, generally interact with each other to learn about and help each other through all the challenges we're sharing in such an uncertain and unfamiliar circumstance. So in case you're unfamiliar with Zoom, we are recording these webinars to share on our website. If you need to listen, or you want to listen to it again, or if anybody was unable to hang out with us live, all participants are currently muted. So if you have any questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of your window to send in any questions you might have about today's presentation. As I said earlier, we're all learning to adapt and exist at distance. And one of the ways many small business owners can do that today is to take a second look at all the paperwork tied to their livelihoods. Whether that means reviewing contracts, seeking additional insurance, or any other legal considerations that have previously kind of been pushed to the back burner, now is the perfect time to make sure your growing business is protected. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter today, Samantha Wagner of Iowa Legal Aid. And if you've been following any of these the last couple of weeks, Sam has so generously given quite a bit of her time so far to helping us with these distance learning opportunities. So here's Sam to talk about legal resiliency for small business.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. And thank you, Zach, for all your hard work and getting everything set up. I know that the Iowa Center is doing a great job of trying to be a resource and a partner and be supportive in these challenging times that we are in. I'm going to try to share my screen now. As Zach said, feel free to pop into the Q&A or to the chat function, and I will be happy to answer your questions as we go. I want this to be useful for you. So please, as you think of things, feel free to interrupt and ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. I'm going to apologize in advance. I have some naughty cats in my apartment who, despite sleeping 18 hours a day, have apparently decided that this is the 1 hour they're not going to sleep. So if you hear something in the background, you'll know it's just my cats. So I'm Samantha Wagner. I'm an attorney at Iowa Legal Aid. I work on small business cases and nonprofit cases. I help folks anywhere sort of in the process of I'm just thinking about starting a business to I started one and now I have a problem, or I started one and things are going great and I need some help with a contract, to winding down when it's time to be done and you make that decision. So we are proud and happy to help along the whole spectrum of your business needs. We're a statewide project. We help businesses all across the state of Iowa. So the good news is that, especially with COVID-19, we've gotten creative about how we can best serve clients, which is really great. So we are not limited by geographic boundaries. Lawyers love a disclaimer, and I'm no exception. Today's event is for informational purposes only. Materials and information we're presenting is not legal advice to you and should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice. I always tell people that the facts change the answer, and sometimes something that's right in one situation is the totally wrong answer in another. Additionally, there can be more than one right answer depending on the situation. So as with any sort of specific legal question tailored to your business, you need to speak with an attorney who can kind of get into the specific situation that you're facing. That said, I would love to be that attorney for you. Um, we provide free legal services for folks who are around 200% of the poverty line. So you can kind of Google online and get a sense of what that looks like for you and your family size. If you are close, please apply anyway. We have a little bit of flexibility in folks that we can help, especially right now. So the easiest way to figure out if you're eligible is probably just to shoot me an email, and I'll set up a time to give you a call. We'll review your information, and we'll take it from there. You're also welcome to call our hotline number that I've got up on the screen during those times. Normally you can walk into our offices too, but due to COVID-19, we are all working remotely, so nobody will be there. The other really great resource is Iowa Legal Aid's Coronavirus COVID-19 page. Our litigation director, Alex Cornia, has been working tirelessly to get answers to important questions facing Iowans regarding unemployment, utilities, leases, commercial, residential leases, commercial leases, all these sorts of things. So we're constantly updating this website with really useful information. So I strongly encourage you to check it out. So as Zach said, we're here to talk about some of the things that you can do right now to set yourself up for success when things get back to normal, whatever that looks like and whenever that might be. The good news is that if you have not been doing a great job with some of these back burner issues or record keeping type concerns, now is a great opportunity to do that, and it's not too late. We can help. So right now, I imagine that most business owners are making difficult decisions about the future of their business, whether they're going to make that expansion that they're planning to do, whether they may need to shut down, whether they need to lay off staff, what the product lines are going to be moving forward. Everybody's making really difficult decisions, and if you're not, you probably will be. Data and numbers should inform those decisions. So to the extent that you are not sure what your numbers look like, this is a great opportunity to figure that stuff out. There's also some very practical reasons for making sure that your record keeping is up to snuff, right? Grant makers, lenders, and other entities that are trying to help businesses right now require financials and require records of, payroll and tax returns and all that kind of stuff for the past few years, depending on the application. So there are very practical reasons that you would want to get this stuff in line. Additionally, practical business concerns, even if we weren't facing unprecedented times in the time of COVID, also encourage excellent record keeping, right? So I always tell people that it's so much easier to collect from someone who hasn't paid a bill 2 weeks after you provided the service rather than 2 months or 6 months down the line, when you realize that that bill or that invoice is still outstanding and now they change their phone number or they're not responsive, right? So keeping your records in line is a really great way to, practically make good business decisions with real data. Things like taxes, lawsuits, product line decisions, growth decisions should also be guided by good record keeping. So, certainly financial records are not the thing that I'm an expert in, but the good news is that the Iowa Center for Economic Success is. If you go to the list of resources that Zach was speaking about on the website for previous webinars, there was a really great one about financial records. I know that there's coaching available if you need some help getting that in line. Additionally, the Des Moines Greater Partnership did a really excellent webinar about the top 5 ways to survive and thrive during economic uncertainty. And in order to to make a lot of the decisions and take a look at some of the things that webinar asked folks to consider, you really do need to have your business records ready to go. So if you need a little motivation for why you should take the time to do the tedious work of getting your balance sheets and different things like that in order, your business is going to be so much better off, regardless of the current crisis we're facing. If you've heard me present before, you've heard me talk about this, but along with good record keeping is contingency planning. So plan for the worst, hope for the best, right? This is a really good opportunity to make sure that all your corporate docs are in one place, all your contracts are in one place, that your employees know what to do if something, God forbid, happened to you. It's also a great opportunity to speak with your estate planning attorney to make sure your wishes are reflected in an enforceable document, especially if you wanted to pass your business to your kids or allow your business partner to buy to buy your part of the business, something like that. The last thing you want is for something that you did not intend to happen. Generally speaking, if you're not compiling your passwords, logins, bank accounts, all that, sort of important information in one place, now is a great opportunity to do so. So yes, this is a great time for to put some good systems in place for making sure that all that information is readily accessible. So here are some questions to ask yourself. Are you record keeping and contingency planning, right? And as a side note, I will certainly send Zach this document, homework assignment, if you will, for questions that you should be going through as a sort of legal self-checkup after we're done with today's presentation. And I'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end of the presentation, but here are some types of questions that you should be considering as you do a self-evaluation of your record keeping and contingency planning, right? Do you know how much money is coming into your business? If the IRS or the IDR asked you to prove the business's income, what would you show them? How are you keeping track of things so you can make business decisions? Do you know who still owes you money? Are you following up on collections? Do you set aside time regularly to organize these types of things? Do your employees know how to do it in case something were to happen to you? Do you set aside money to make sure you can pay bills on time, or maybe even start building a little emergency fund for a rainy day? Other questions that I always encourage my clients to consider are things like, how long are you keeping your records? Have you considered making a backup copy? This can be an important conversation, especially for things that may involve a lawsuit or may involve some sort of dispute in the future. So employee-employer records, communications with a client who was unhappy with your services, for example, and the steps you took to remedy that. These are all things that you want to make sure that you're keeping good track of. I also tell people to keep good track of their business receipts for when tax time comes, right? It's going to be so much cheaper to give your accountant a stack of well-organized docs and well-organized receipts than to just hand them a bag and say, here, good luck. And, I'll pay you for all the time you spent to search through everything. So again, these are just a starting point. Don't let this be the end all be all in how you think about organizing your business records. So the other thing to think about right now is business formalities. If you've heard me speak before, you've heard me talk about the different types of business entities. Business entities differ in a number of things, but the biggest thing that most people know about is the extent to which you are personally liable, or the extent to which you are personally on the hook if someone sues you or something happens with the business. a lot of people choose to have a separate entity like an LLC or a corporation or a nonprofit that establishes that the business is separate from yourself. And so if someone were to sue the business, for example, they'd be suing the business and not you. And even though it sounds really, really silly, I tell people to think about it like a puppet, right? Even though I am the one operating the puppet and it's my hand that's, moving its mouth or moving its little arms, it's separate from me. It's technically a different character. Under the law, it is a separate legal person. When you file those papers with the Secretary of State to establish your LLC, for example, I tell people to think about that like a birth certificate, right? And if something were to happen or if someone were to try to hurt the puppet, they only hurt the puppet. They're not hurting your hand, if that makes sense. The problem with this is that a lot of people think that just because they have a separate entity in place, that means that they're absolutely protected from personal liability, and that is just not the case. There are some things that you need to do to keep those protections in place, and that's kind of what I wanted to remind everybody about today, so that if maybe some of these have fallen by the wayside, now's a good time to get back on the wagon. So just as a reminder, a separate legal entity like an LLC, like a corporation, is considered a separate legal person under the law. It pays its own taxes. It can enter into contracts in the organization's name. It can assume obligations, can incur and pay debts, may sue and be sued in its own right, and would be accountable for illegal activities. So some of the biggest thing that you can do to make sure that you keep this protection in place and make sure that you keep this, puppet protecting your hand is to not commingle personal expenses and business expenses. I'm talking separate bank accounts for your business expenses, and making sure that when you are, if you're paying yourself for something, if you're, making a payment to yourself, that you're not just depositing money that you earned from a job into your personal bank account, that it goes to the business bank account and then you are being paid from there, if that makes sense. This is a really, really important, because the more that you mix together the personal and the business money, the more it looks like you and the business are the same legal person, and that there is no distinction between you and the puppet that's on your hand, that you're really just one person. And that means that you could have exposure, or you could have, it would be a risk that some of your assets could be on the hook if someone were to sue you. And that would sort of defeat the whole purpose of having these protections in the first place, having an LLC, for example. So if you are, if you are in the situation where you have been not so great about paying for things out of the business bank account, or you've been depositing checks into your personal bank account directly, now's a great time to stop doing that and to make sure that those things are being taken care of appropriately. The other thing that can be a risk here is called adequate capitalization, which basically means that there's enough money in the business to pay for its debts. You're not taking out a loan and then running away with all the money. There's enough money to pay the obligations that you take on. If someone were to sue you, there's some money in the business. What that amount is going to look like is going to be different for every business. It's going to depend on your insurance. It's going to depend on a number of things, but that's certainly something to think about. The other thing is to make sure that you have, if you do have a separate legal entity like an LLC or a corporation, that everybody knows that. Unless you have a fictitious name filed, you need to have LLC or corporation on all of your stuff: business cards, invoices, websites, contracts, etc. Let everybody know that you are a limited liability company and you will not be personally on the hook. Now is a great time to update that if you haven't done that. I also tell people that they need to be very cautious about how they sign things. So if you are signing a contract or an agreement or some sort of understanding, you want to sign it in your capacity as the business owner, not in your personal capacity. So if I were a business owner and I owned Happy Lawyer LLC, I would sign a contract as something like signed by Happy Lawyer LLC by Samantha Wagner, comma owner, or by Samantha Wagner, comma president of Happy Lawyer LLC, right? I'm making it clear that the capacity in which I'm agreeing to be obligated on the contract is the capacity that relates to my role in the business, not my personal capacity. So those are some things that you can do right now. If you have maybe let some of these formalities get away from you. Again, some other things to consider is if your business has assets like tools, vehicle, or land, are the assets, has it been transferred to the business? If not, now's a great time to do that. How much debt does the business have? Are you able to pay it off? Do you have a rainy day fund? Do you know if your business entity has ongoing filing requirements? Do you have to file any documents with the state each year? Have you done so? Have you signed any contracts for the business? Did you sign those in your capacity as the business owner or for yourself personally? If for corporations or nonprofits, do you have annual meetings? Have you been doing that? What documentation do you have of that? Are you and your partner on board with who will make major decisions? What's going to happen if your partner wants to sell the business? Have you gotten that kind of thing in writing? What changes has your business experienced in the past year? Has anything changed that makes you think that you maybe need a different business entity? Sometimes when people grow larger or get to a certain size, it can really make sense to go from a sole proprietorship to a more formal business entity like an LLC. So again, these questions are just a starting point, and I'll be happy to make a full list of questions available to folks after we're done today. So I'm sure it's no surprise to any of you that some of the biggest questions we're getting right now are about contracts. I will be, just as a heads up, I will be speaking about commercial leases on Monday with Bill Wright from Hubble. And so we're going to dive into the ins and outs of your commercial leases. So I'm doing a small plug on that now. But even more than that, now is a great time to consider the different contracts that you have in place, and to figure out, hey, we always meant to get this in writing. Maybe now is a great time to do that. I always tell people that I think that the benefits of contracts are upfront. The benefits are making sure that everyone is on the same page, so that we don't have problems down the line, right? I have very simple misunderstandings about things that don't matter, like what time we're going to dinner, or who's cooking, or who's going to pick who up. You don't want that kind of thing you don't want that sort of uncertainty when it comes to business decisions. So now is a great time to get stuff in writing. Now is a great time to review your contracts and see what needs to be updated, what needs to be renegotiated. If you have contracts that you use with your clients, now is a great time to review those. Are you still offering the same services that you were before? Sometimes people have things that change, like, before this certain service was included, but now I'm charging extra for it, and I want to make sure that that's reflected in my contract. As businesses evolve, these things change. So as an example, I had a client who was a wedding day of event coordinator, and she told me that she was having problems with a lot of her clients because they would sit down and meet with her for 2 hours to go over all her ideas with all her experience that she brought to the table in her role as sort of a wedding coordinator. And then like 3 months later, they'd want to sit down and have the same conversation all over again. And she was kind of realizing as her business grew that wasn't really a sustainable use of her time. So we were able to, adapt her contract and add in, provisions that said, hey, I'm happy to speak with you. We'll have an initial meeting to go over all my ideas, and you can, draw on my expertise and my consulting. But anything more than, after that initial meeting is going to be charged at a rate of X dollars per hour. And that's really helped to cut down on some of those superfluous meetings that she was having, just kind of managing expectations. And as your business evolves, it's a great idea to do that sort of thing. It's going to be very unlikely that you have a contract that will last you from the beginning of your business to the end. These things change as you learn and evolve. So here are some questions to think about. Do you have a contract? When's the last time you reviewed it? Is it still accurate? Does it cover all the potential risks of your business? So as you as your business evolves, you probably become more of an expert about what sorts of risks you're concerned about, and the risks that you're willing to accept and the risks that you want them to accept. So if one customer or client wants to change something in your default contract, are you making sure to write it down and initial it? If there's ongoing changes as the project progresses, do you get them in writing? This is probably one of the biggest things, other than commercial leases, that I see big disputes about, right? Well, we were going to agree to this, we agreed to this, but it doesn't say it in the contract. Well, now we have to either fight about what it says, or we have to go to court and let a judge decide what it said or what it was supposed to say. And all of that takes time and money. So if there are ongoing changes, get them in writing. And now is a great time, if you have not been doing that, to get that taken care of. Do you anticipate entering any new contracts this year? If so, have you reviewed it? Have you had a chance to ask questions? Have you shopped around to make sure you're getting a good deal and that all your needs are being addressed? So do you think we could negotiate any part of it to be more favorable? Have you had an attorney look at it? Do you have any contracts that you've not fulfilled your part of the bargain on? Why not? What's the status of this contract? So this is a little bit beyond the scope of today's presentation, but with COVID, we're seeing a lot of folks who, just due to supply chain interruptions or, labor or, just different issues that are coming up, that aren't going to be able to fulfill part of their contract. So if, your wedding gets canceled, maybe you don't need all that catering. What are we going to do about that? Now is a great time to consult to figure out what your options are. And to, if, for example, your caterer is more than happy to provide those services and carry over your deposit until your wedding happens in the fall, for example, let's get that in writing. Let's just make sure everybody's on the same page. I'm going to go ahead and pause right now. I want to see if there's any questions. I know it's kind of hard when you're doing this remotely, so I want to make sure that if there's any questions that come up, that I'm giving you opportunity to ask that. I don't see anything now, but please don't hesitate to reach out to stop me, and we can get your questions answered. All right. So marching forward, commercial leases, very spooky. You should come to our webinar on Monday to talk about different commercial lease issues that folks are facing right now. As people start to consider, hey, can I keep this business going? Should I keep this business going? What does that look like for me? What will the future be like? No conversation or discussion of that, or no thoughts about that should be complete without reviewing commercial lease, figure out what your obligations are. All right, so now is as good of time as any to think about risks to your business. There is no business that operates without risk. That's just a fact. And what risks you have are going to depend on the industry you're in. There can be risks to to assets that you use to run your business, to employees, to customers, cybersecurity issues, right? There's no list to the things that can go wrong in a business. And I think that this is a great opportunity to connect with folks at the Iowa Center, or folks in SCORE, or some of the breakfast clubs or mentorship opportunities, because this is really something that you learn as you get more expertise, and as your business grows, and you learn about what sorts of risks you can expect. So generally speaking, I tell people to kind of identify hazards, identify assets that may be impacted by the hazard, what that impact would be, and how you can diminish the hazard. So if you look online, there are a ton of different matrices that you can use to assess risk in your business, and steps you can use to analyze and prioritize managing those risks, right? Lawyers can sit down and think about risks all day long, but if you get too fixated on that, you'll never have a business. So the best thing you can do is to think about, okay, what are my priorities? What am I the most concerned about? And how can I address it? If I have a catering business, I'm most worried about people getting sick. So what am I going to do to manage that? Well, I'm going to make sure my employees are regularly retrained on food safety concerns. I'm going to make sure that I have that I regularly take the latest and greatest food safety courses. I'm going to make sure that all food is temperature checked and temperature controlled before it's served. What those steps are going to be is going to depend on your business. But so once you sit down and think through what those risks are, and what the risks are, and how you can diminish them, get some systems in place, right? Get some systems in place and follow the systems. So maybe you have regular audits for by a third party to kind of make sure that there's nothing bad going on. You have whistleblower policies. There's a clear process of command for if someone feels harassed by their supervisor, that there's another place that they can go. You have cybersecurity policies, fraud prevention. If you're a business with a lot of cash, how are you making sure that that cash is getting where it needs to go? Another thing that I just remember talking about in college was the fraud triangle, and the importance of making sure that you have different people trained on how to do different responsibilities for the business. And I really think that is very important, even though I thought the fraud triangle was a funny term when I heard it many years ago. If you only have one person who's trained to do reimbursements or payroll, you're never going to know if they're embezzling from you. So it's really important to get other people involved in those types of systems. It can also be really important for if that person wants to take a vacation, for example, or in sort of like a COVID-19 crisis, that person gets sick and can't do their job, right? So there's a lot of very practical reasons for getting some good systems in place. And now is a great opportunity to research them. If you just poke around online, you can read all about different risk management systems. It can also be a great opportunity to tap into mentors at the Iowa Center, SCORE, in your local mentorship programs, to kind of get a sense of what other people are doing. Once you get those systems in place, you need to follow them. I heard a presentation once that said that well-written, well-enforced policies never see the light of the jury. And I think that that's very true, right? If you knew about a risk and you didn't do anything about it, it looks terrible and it harms the reputation of your company, right? But even worse than that is to have a policy that you didn't follow, or to have a policy that you didn't apply even, right? So once you get these policies, you need to follow them, apply them equally to all people, train your employees on it, address failures or address, issues that come up, update the policies if you find that they're not working, and retrain, right? Lather, rinse, and repeat, this sort of situation. But that, you know, this is a great time for this sort of thing. So here's the sorts of things that I'm thinking about when I'm advising people about thinking about risks. Do you have a policy or a handbook? Have you trained people? Do you regularly review these systems and procedures with employees? Do you treat all employees the same? Have you made it clear to employees what they are authorized to do in their jobs and what they're not authorized to do? You know, if you have a business where you're working with children or vulnerable populations, there's going to be some best practices for working with those populations that you really need to make sure that you're following. Is it appropriate in your industry to have clients sign releases or waivers? How long do you keep these releases? So I'm thinking about like my physical training clients, or you know, some sorts of situations like that where you're engaging in a dangerous activity, and you want to make sure that you have those protections and you have a policy for how long you're keeping those on file in case you need them. Now is a great time to think about all those sorts of things. But that said, even if you plan and try to manage risk the best way you can, things still happen. Things still go wrong. Accidents happen, right? The number one piece of advice that I give business owners, even if you have an LLC or corporation or some way to protect yourself from being personally liable, is to get business insurance. Insurance is the best line of defense from having to pay out of your pocket for claims against your business. So here's some things people are thinking about. Does my insurance actually cover what I think it covers? Am I forgetting anything? Do I need more insurance? So unfortunately, right now, people are kind of learning the maybe less great news about what their insurance policy covers or does not cover. And so here are some things that I tell people to think about when they are thinking about whether their insurance needs are sufficient. So don't assume that your broker or your agent understands your industry. You should really take time to spell out what you do and what your risks are. I get it. I know that can be kind of a hassle, but I really think it's a great idea to, you know, tell your insurance agent what you are concerned about and what you are worried about having coverage for. If you've signed a contract that, you know, says you're going to have certain insurance coverage, so a lot of commercial leases I see, for example, talk about insurance coverage that, you know, the tenant is promising to get. Make sure that you have that coverage. Bring that contract to that insurance broker and make sure that they get a chance to review it. So I've gotten a question that says, what type of legal protection should we be using on our websites? For example, you see a lot of websites have these elements in their website footer: copyright, LLC, policy terms. Should we be utilizing these on our website? And do you recommend a source for us to populate this text accurately on your website? So you're going to, as far as the intellectual property is concerned, you're going to want to consult with an attorney to figure out what your goals are, if there's some sort of intellectual property that you want to protect. But if you have, the biggest thing is if you have some sort of separate legal entity like a limited liability company, and you do not have that on your website, you really need to let people know about that unless you have a fictitious name, like I talked about earlier. It says Russ Dale would like to answer this question live. Does Russ want to tap in and answer?
Sorry, this is Zach logged in as well. I'm just
okay. Sorry.
Just managing the questions quietly.
Oh, okay. No problem. I thought maybe you were going to educate us about something that you guys do.
That's
so
about
yeah,
as good of
concerns
an idea
about.
as
So certainly that's, you know, these are exactly the types of things that you should be kind of looking into at this time about whether, you know, you need to put a copyright out there to let people know that you want to protect your intellectual property. I don't think that's a bad idea. If you have a privacy policy about how people are interacting with the website, or a terms of use even, That's a great thing to have on there, right? Like we will delete comments that are not productive or not unkind, um, different things like that. Also, I recently had a client who wanted to know if he should have some sort of disclaimer in front of videos he makes about how to do sort of DIY things around the house. You know, your mileage may vary, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that's a bad idea. We helped him get some language done. So these are exactly the sorts of things that you should be thinking about right now. That's a great question. Thank you. So as you're thinking about insurance, like I said, you have to make sure that um, you're getting coverage for the things that you know for your risks. But as far as forgetting anything, have you forgotten to cover interns? Have you forgotten to cover volunteers? Have you agreed to indemnify people in a different contract and get insurance coverage for it? What about subcontractors? Um, what about renewing the policy? Have I forgotten that I needed to pay that premium? Do I have a duty to report a possible claim? These are all the sorts of things that you do not want to be caught by surprise. A last question I tell people to think about is, do I need more insurance? Is my equipment covered? Do I have, you know, flood insurance, for example? Do I have directors and officers insurance? An adequate business loss insurance if the business would take a while to ramp back up after an occurrence. You know, things like mold can be something to think about. So these are all the sorts of things that I tell people to think about. So are there any other questions? Oh, thanks. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. So insurance, everyone's favorite topic. Oh, why won't my presentation go forward? Okay. So, you know, here's the other thing too. Unfortunately, a lot of people are being unpleasantly surprised about what their policies cover and don't cover. Especially right now, people thought that their business interruption insurance would cover losses from COVID-19, and unfortunately, that has not been the case for a lot of folks. So I really encourage people to review their insurance policies themselves. Something to remember is that insurance is a contract. You have to look at that contract and that policy language to figure out what coverage you have. Do not rely on your broker or your insurance agent. Unfortunately, I have seen some misunderstandings of policies that they sell or just blatant misrepresentations in sort of a bad faith situation, right? There are also things like when you're required to put an insurance company on notice. Sometimes you can lose coverage if you fail to notify an insurance company when you're required to. So the sooner the better, and you know, better to be safe than sorry. Question of whether your insurance coverage will cover a specific thing is really specific and going to depend on what that thing is and what your policy says. So how do I review my insurance policy? So step one is that there must be an occurrence of an event that triggers coverage. Without an occurrence, there's no coverage. What an occurrence is will be defined in the insurance policy. So that's step one, right? Is there a triggering occurrence? Step two, if there is coverage, look to see if there's any exclusions. So for example, let's say you have coverage because your building blew up, but there's an exclusion that says there's no coverage if it blew up because you had a fireworks party at your house, then there would be no coverage for you, even though it might look that way at first glance, right? Sort of a little carve out. Like, yeah, generally there's coverage, but not if you're having a fireworks party. So then you have to look at and see whether there's any exceptions to the exclusions. I know it's very complicated and tedious, but it really is important to take a look at all these things. So if you have coverage because your building blew up, but you're having a fireworks party at your house, which was an exclusion, so it wasn't gonna cover it, But the exception to the exclusion says that the exclusion doesn't apply if you're drinking red wine while having a fireworks party and you are actually drinking red wine while having the fireworks party, then the exclusion wouldn't apply and you'd have coverage again. So you really have to look at these documents holistically and read through the whole dang thing to see what your coverage looks like. Other types of insurance policies you could consider as you are thinking through whether you have enough insurance at this moment is event cancellation, supply chain or trade disruption policies, travel insurance, property insurance, extra expense policies. Some of these specialty policies can be really valuable because they offer broader coverage than property policies and often don't require physical damage or loss, which is a challenge that folks are seeing right now. But I would imagine that moving forward, a lot of these policies are going to exclude coronavirus or COVID concerns. So again, you need to make sure that you're understanding what it is that you're purchasing, right? I'm also hearing a lot about bacteria and virus exclusions. So that's definitely something that you want to think about when you are thinking about making these purchases, right? A lot of people are getting very disappointed by their travel insurance or their event cancellation insurance right now. So I'm going to skip over the list of questions that I usually tell people to kind of think about. Again, I'll make those available. But you really do need to read and review your policy to understand what's covered and what's excluded. So one of the biggest issues that I see is a misunderstanding about whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee. It's really important to think about the nature of the relationship between you and your worker in order to make sure you're fulfilling all the requirements you have, depending on whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee. So generally, independent contractors are in business for themselves. They set their own schedule, they do their own taxes, they conduct analysis about whether their business is making money, they determine the best way to get the job done. An employee is somebody that you have authority over. You tell them how to do the job, you tell them what shirt to wear when they're doing it, tell them when they're going to do it in the best way, right? Now, there is any number of gray lines in between these distinctions, but it's really important to try to figure out what this is going to look like, and it could be a great opportunity to speak with an attorney if you're not sure, if you have some kind of weird circumstances that kind of push one way and on one hand and the other hand. So why does this matter? People, why does it matter if you misclassify people? Well, it matters because you have to pay certain taxes for employees that you don't have to pay for independent contractors, like employment taxes. So if you classify a worker incorrectly, you could be liable for additional taxes owed that you've not paid. Additionally, I've heard it said that everybody loves an independent contractor until someone gets hurt. And I think that that's probably true. They're going to look at the terms of the contract to figure out who needs to pay for what if somebody gets hurt. Independent contractors can't sue under discrimination law. They're not entitled to FMLA, whereas employees are. So if you think that you have an independent contractor, you should have an agreement in place to define that relationship. When the courts or the government or the IRS or whoever is making that decision about whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee, that agreement is not going to be controlling, right? But it is helpful to kind of take a look at the intentions of the parties. So I'm going to skip over employment laws here, but employment laws are a really great I always tell people, if you think you're going to be expanding your business from one person to some sort of worker, that is a great opportunity to speak with an attorney. There's a lot of laws that apply to employer-employee relationships these laws are rapidly changing right now due to legislation passed by the federal government. And you want to make sure that you are on the right side of that, for sure. Similarly, taxes are a big concern that you need to make sure that you're taking care of. I always tell people a cautionary tale about sales tax because it's often not obvious and can catch people by surprise, and that's certainly not something that you want to have to deal with. If you're paying cash from the business, your adult child who lives at home while you're still a small business, is this acceptable? So I think the question is, if you are paying cash for wages to your adult child who lives at home, is this still acceptable? So again, I can't answer specific questions, but I'm not exactly sure what you mean by acceptable, but I do know that there's still going to be questions of whether you're classifying that person correctly as an independent contractor or an employee, and therefore what sorts of tax implications there's going to be in regard to that relationship. And you know, your outside relationship to that person is not necessarily determinative of, you know, what that looks like. And if you have questions about whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee, you should speak with an attorney, I would definitely say. What's the best way to handle this particular situation? So I would encourage you to apply for our services so we can talk a little bit more about it. It's really not good for me to get into like the specifics of someone's particular situation, because like I said, depending on one thing or another, one fact can change the answer. So again, please feel free to apply for our services. I'm happy to talk more in depth about that. Otherwise, if I forgot to mention, if you are not eligible for our services, the Iowa Bar Association has a really great Find a Lawyer service where it's $25 for the first 30 minutes. So if you do your homework that I give you and go through the self-assessment, you can get some great advice and narrow down what your questions are for a 30-minute consultation for $25. That seems like a pretty good deal to get some of these sort of compliance and legal resiliency concerns handled. Again, lots of questions to ask. Have I made sure that I don't have to pay sales tax? Am I withholding the appropriate amount? Am I paying, you know, the employer side of things? Am I keeping my tax records safe? Am I required to file in other states, especially regarding sales tax, right? My folks who are selling on Etsy and things like that. Lots of questions. So the last topic I'll kind of get into is intellectual property. People have lots of very cool ideas and lots of very cool content, and I would hate for those great ideas to be taken by someone else, right? So now could be a great opportunity to think, you know, what kinds of protections do I need for my logo, for my images, my inventions, some of the content that's on my website? If you have a certain process or approach that's special to your business, do you keep it secret and limit discussion and dissemination about it to keep it, you know, keep it as private as you can? Have you confirmed that you're not accidentally doing some copyright infringement or some intellectual property infringement? Have you made it clear to your employees or contractors who owns the work product they make? So this is a situation that often can come up when you're hiring someone to build your website, for example. It's a great practice to have an agreement in place that goes over who will own what when you're done. Definitely don't want to be surprised by that. So again, I know I kind of rushed over those last slides about employment or IP, but I'm happy to answer any questions that have come up, assuming that my computer is not frozen. The last thing I will mention is licensing and permits. I have come across a lot of clients who have been operating businesses that they actually needed a license or a permit for without having that license or permit. So that's certainly not something that you want to be surprised by. It's also important to look into whether any of your workers are doing things that require a license, if they have that. So again, there's a lot of folks out there who want to help you get some of these business records in line, who want to answer some of these questions. If I can't do it, check out the Drake Law Transactional Law Clinic, the Iowa Find a Lawyer service that I talked about, SBDCs, the Iowa Center. There's a lot of folks out there who want to help you with your business, especially right now. The other thing is that I forgot to mention, Iowa Legal Aid, in partnership with the Iowa State Bar Association, has a COVID-19 hotline where folks who have concerns about relating to COVID-19 can call in. We see if you are eligible for legal aid services, and then if you are not, we pass you along to a volunteer attorney who has agreed to help. So especially if you're having questions with your business relating to COVID-19, that is a wonderful resource available for you. I think Governor Reynolds has also promoted that hotline too. I will send out that self-evaluation of legal issues, so you have some homework or some tarea to do after we're done here. Otherwise, please get in touch with me. Please connect with me, Iowa Legal Aid. There is a lot of great information on our website. I would love for you to apply to be one of our clients so I can answer some of those specific questions. So with that, I will turn it back over to Zach, so I am respectful of your time. But I just want to say thank you to everybody who tuned in today. These are weird times, these are uncertain times, but we're all doing our best to try to build a support network.
I want to say thanks to you and all of the volunteers we've had in the last 3 weeks. We are, like everyone, as I said, scrambling to figure out how to exist and work in this new space. So we're putting out a lot of content. Please keep checking our COVID resources page on our website and the page next to that has all of our upcoming events. Like, for instance, next Monday, Sam is going to be joining us again, along with Bill Wright from Hubble, to talk about commercial leases. We have a lot of tutorials. We're recording all of these webinars and posting them on our page afterwards. We're doing one-on-one coaching. Again, that's something you can set up, schedule a time right on the front page of our website. So please get in contact with us if you need help with anything. That's our job. That's what we're here and ready to do. Keep checking our social media, our Instagram and our Facebook group, the Iowa Small Business Resources and Support. I struggle with that every time I try to say it. I want to say thanks to Sam again. I want to say thanks to Katie at the Women's Business Center for helping with this and all the other online events that we're putting together. She's been great to work with. And I hope that everyone is going to tune in to all of the future online courses that we're doing next week and the weeks to come. Again, we're all learning new routines and skills and tools. And so any feedback we can get on the job we're doing so far with this education series, it's new to all of us. So we want to hear back from you. We want to know what you need in terms of resources and education. And we want to be able to supply that for everybody across the state. If we don't have any other questions, I don't see anything in the chat or the questions Q&A. Thanks, Sam, and we'll see you all Monday.